When we're creating an application, we often have the need to repeat the execution of a block of code, a set of statements. And to do that in PHP, we have three looping constructs. These looping constructs have some control condition that counts and terminates the loop based on the number of iterations or some other consideration. The while loop uses some condition that resolves to a true or a false. And as long as that condition is true, the block of code that's controlled by the while loop will continue to execute. So within that block of code, we must set the condition that will terminate the loop. Otherwise, the loop will run infinitely because the condition will always be true. Now we do that sometimes on purpose, that we have this infinite loop for event handlers and other special conditions. But generally, if you're trying to iterate over a block of code, you're going to want to do that for some set amount of time or for some set count. So the while loop, again, requires that we control that looping condition from within the while block. The for looping construct has the definition of the loop control in the call. So when we create a for loop, we have to give it a starting value, we have to give it an ending value, and we have to give it the increment by which it's going to count the number of iterations through the code block. And then the for each looping construct is a specialized looping construct that keeps count for itself. So we give it a collection, an array, or another collection of items that it will keep track of how many items it has to loop over and perform whatever's in the block of code. Now, once we're inside a block of code, we want to keep that control. So we can set the looping variable in a while loop to terminate the while loop whenever we want inside of the code. But under some conditions, we want to leave the loop altogether. And we do that using the break statement. So if we have the break statement under some conditional control construct, like in the example here with an if statement, when that value in the if statement resolves to true, the break statement will execute. The break statement says, just terminate this loop and get me out of here. And when it says get me out of here, it takes us to the next line of code following the close of the loop block. But it terminates the loop. The continue keyword, on the other hand, terminates the current iteration, keeps you in the looping construct, but just terminates the current iteration. So let's see how this works in code. Right, so in these little code snippets, I wanted to demonstrate the three loop constructs. I want to show you the first while loop. And notice that in the while loop construct, we need to define the loop control variable. Outside of the while loop, outside of the while definition, we need to have some control variable. In this case, I've called it counter, and I've initialized the value to 0. So now inside of the test for the while loop, the condition that's going to control the loop, I just ask the question, is counter less than 10? And as long as that condition is true, the while loop will execute, and in this case, will simply echo a statement that includes the value of the counter as we're going through the loop. Then notice that it's critically important to remember that somewhere in the loop, you must set the termination condition. So in this case, I'm incrementing counter by 1. Counter plus plus is the shorthand for saying counter plus equals 1. We could have written this any of these three ways. Counter plus equals 1, that would have worked. Or we could have said counter equals counter plus 1. Either of those. would work. They do exactly the same thing. I choose the shorthand, whatever you're comfortable with until you get comfortable with these combination operators. Just use what makes you comfortable. So the key here with the while loop is that we have to set the control. We have to define the control variable. We have to set the control condition, and then we have to increment or change the control condition so that at some point the while loop will terminate. In contrast to that, if we look at the for loop, inside of the for loop construct, we're actually defining our control variable, we're testing the control variable, and we're incrementing the control variable. And all of that happens on one line of code versus on the while loop having the initialization, the test, and the incrementation in separate parts of the code. Easy to forget one of those, and typically the thing that's forgotten is the increment, so that the while loop never terminates. So from that perspective, I'm in favor of the for loop. But again, it's a stylistic decision because functionally they do exactly the same thing. So in this case, for the for loop, I'm just printing out another line of code with the counter value as it's going through the loop. And now we haven't talked about arrays yet, but just accept that we're creating an array here that has the values. An array is a collection of values that contain the values 0 through 9, just the integer values 0 through 9. And then the for each loop says, take that collection of values, call that collection of values num, and then print each of those num values. And when you're done, when you're at the end of the collection, just terminate the loop. So this is a very nice, when we have collections, this is a very nice looping construct because it controls itself. So let's run this and see how we do. Let me just reload the page because I've already run it here once. So I reload the page and we have the while construct counting 0 to 9. Notice that it's less than 10, so we never do the number 10. Same thing with the for loop, and then for the for each loop, we're counting through elements, the values that are inside of the collection, and those values are 0 through 9. So just to show you how simple it is to forget to control the loop construct in the while, I'm just going to comment this out, save it, and we're going to rerun this, and you'll see that it's not loading. It's not loading because on the server side, we're stuck in this while loop. It will never terminate. Notice that now we just got a dump from the server. All of the values are 0 because the counter never increments. And so this condition, while less than 10, will always be true. And so we have no way of terminating the while loop, and it will run forever. And in this case, lock the browser and the server. Okay, so after having to restart my browser because of the while loop running infinitely, I've done that, and I'd like to talk about the loop termination, the actual loop control keywords, continue and break. So what I've done is I've set up a for loop that will count to 100. Inside of that for loop, I'm saying when the value of the counter is equal to 42, break. What break is going to do is kick us out of the loop, completely out of the loop construct. Not just the iteration when the value is 42, but out of the loop construct completely. And in contrast to that, with the for loop here, so identical for loop counting from 0 to 100, I'm saying when the value is 42, I'd like you to continue. Well, what that tells the loop to do is when the counter value equals 42, stop and just go to the next value. It doesn't kick us out of the loop, it just kicks us out of the current iteration. So let's run this, and this is the for loop with the break statement, and you'll notice that the break statement executed at the counter value equals 42. So the last value that got printed here by the echo statement was 41, because when we saw the counter value 42, we terminated this loop and left it. In contrast to that, with the continue statement in this loop, what we're missing is the number 42. Just the number 42, because what we said here was when the counter value is 42, just skip this iteration. Go to the next iteration. So go to 43. And sure enough, that's what it did. Went to 43. So that's just how easy it is. We can control the iteration of a loop with the counter values. We can control when to terminate the loop abruptly if we want to with a break statement, or to control the iterations of the loop based on some value with the continue statement. Okay, so now it's your turn with an exercise. What we'd like to do is create a web page that is going to print the values from 0 to 10, but in reverse order. Use a for loop to do this and print them in reverse order. Then use a while loop to print the square of the while loop control variable, the counter for the while loop.